Welcome back, survivors. Today we're diving into something dark, something that almost ended the wasteland before it had a chance to rebuild. We're talking about the Enclave, the shadow government, the fascists in power armor, the faction that came closer to global genocide than any other threat in Fallout history. This isn't just another faction analysis. This is a confession from someone who was there, someone who helped plan humanity's extinction, and what they reveal will change how you see the entire Fallout universe. Let's begin this dark journey into the heart of the Wasteland's most evil faction. They told me I was saving humanity. That's what I kept telling myself as I watched the test subjects convulse on the laboratory floor. That's what I whispered in the sterile darkness of my quarters aboard Control Station Enclave, 175 miles off the coast of San Francisco, when sleep wouldn't come. I was a chemical core technician, and my hands helped create the most efficient killing machine humanity had ever conceived. Not a weapon you could hold, not a bomb you could drop, something far more elegant, something that would ride the jet streams across the entire planet and erase 99.5% of human life in just 2 weeks. I need to tell you this story before it's too late, before the Wasteland forgets what almost happened, before history rewrites the Enclave as just another faction fighting for survival. We weren't survivors, we were exterminators, and I helped sharpen the blade. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I was there. I saw things that the Brotherhood of Steel's history books will never record. I knew secrets that even most Enclave personnel never learned. And I'm going to tell you everything, because someone needs to understand just how close we came to ending all life as you know it. It started for me in 2237 when I was transferred from our Navarro outpost to the oil rig. I thought it was a promotion. Fresh out of advanced chemical engineering training, eager to serve the last bastion of true American civilization, I boarded that vertibird believing I was about to help rebuild the world. The senior officers welcomed me with firm handshakes and classified briefings. They showed me our advanced power armor, our plasma weapons, our vertibird fleet. They spoke of manifest destiny, of America's second chance, of purifying the wasteland so civilization could rise again. Then they took me down to sub-level 3. The smell hit me first. Disinfectant, trying desperately to mask something organic and wrong. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that sickly white glow that makes shadows look deeper than they should. Dr. Charles Curling met me at the entrance, a tired-looking man in a chemical-stained lab coat. He didn't smile. He just looked at me with eyes that had seen too much and said 5 words that changed everything I believed. Welcome to the Curling Project. I didn't understand then. I didn't know that the Enclave's leadership had long ago decided that everyone outside our sealed bunkers was subhuman. Mutants, degenerates, radiation-poison mistakes that needed to be corrected. I didn't know that our founding fathers, the shadow government that survived the Great War, had been planning humanity's second Holocaust since before the bombs even fell. You see, the Enclave wasn't just the remnants of the pre-war United States government. We were the architects, the deep state that everyone whispered about but nobody could prove existed. While Vault-Tec built their underground prisons and ran their twisted experiments, we were the ones pulling the strings. We funded them, we monitored them, we harvested their data. Every cruel test, every psychological torture, every time a vault dweller suffered for science, that information flowed directly to us. And we had plans for it, grand plans. Originally, before the Great War, the Enclave leadership believed Earth would be completely uninhabitable after nuclear exchange. So they designed Project Safehouse with Vault-Tec, not to save Americans, but to gather data on how to run a closed population system. The vaults were test chambers, the residents were lab rats. All that data, all that suffering was meant to help us build something magnificent, a multi-generational starship, an ark to carry pure, uncontaminated humanity to a new world. But the bombs fell before we were ready. The starship dream died, and the Enclave fractured into isolated pockets across America, communication difficult, leadership fragmented. We survived in our bunkers, on our oil rig, in our mountain facilities, and we discovered something unexpected. The surface world hadn't become completely uninhabitable. Life persisted, mutated, irradiated, twisted life, but life nonetheless. That's when the Enclave's mission changed. If Earth could still support human civilization, then we didn't need to leave. We just needed to cleanse it, remove all the mistakes, all the mutations, all the impure bloodlines, start fresh with only those who had been protected from radiation's touch. Us, the Enclave, the last pure humans on Earth. And that required a tool, a final solution, something that could reach every corner of the globe and eliminate the contaminated while leaving the pure untouched. Dr. Curling's team spent years developing it. The project began in 2236 when Enclave assault squads, accompanied by Wasteland slaves, excavated the ruins of the Mariposa military base. Deep in those contaminated chambers lay something precious, the forced evolutionary virus. The Master had used it to create his army of super mutants. We were going to use it to create a plague. I remember the day they brought back the first samples, sealed containers, radiation shielded, carried by soldiers in full environmental suits. Many of the slaves who dug down into those ruins had already started showing signs of exposure. Their skin taking on that greenish tint, their muscles swelling, their minds beginning to cloud. We didn't help them. We studied them, documented their transformation. Then we incinerated them before the mutation completed. One of those early subjects was different though, a soldier, Special Agent Frank Horrigan, assigned to the excavation detail. 25 years old, built like a brick wall, serving on President Richardson's Secret Service before he'd been reassigned to Wasteland Patrol for some undocumented psychological incident. When Horrigan was exposed to FEV at Mariposa, the Enclave scientists didn't incinerate him. They saw potential. They brought him to the oil rig, to Sub-Level 3, to the same laboratory complex where I would later work. For 2 years, from 2236 to 2238, Horrigan underwent transformation, not the uncontrolled mutation that created standard super mutants. Something directed, something enhanced. Dr. Curling and his team operated on Horrigan constantly. They injected him with modified FEV strains. They studied how his body responded. They kept him heavily sedated because whenever he was conscious, even briefly, violence erupted. The incident reports I later read described bloodshed that required entire cleanup crews. What they created was unprecedented. A super mutant, yes, but enhanced far beyond anything the Master had achieved. 12 feet tall, over 2,000 pounds of enhanced muscle and bone, intelligence preserved, though damaged, loyalty conditioned through presidential directive and psychological programming, and completely dependent on a custom suit of power armor that was grafted directly onto his mutating flesh, pumping drugs through his system constantly, keeping him stable, keeping him lethal. By March 2239, Frank Horrigan was operational. The Enclave's perfect weapon, a walking nightmare that could punch through deathclaws and armored humans alike. They gave him experimental weapons, a plasma gun that could vaporize targets, a blade as long as a man, and they unleashed him on the Wasteland. The field reports came back with words like horrifically successful. Horrigan completed missions in under 60 seconds. He executed targets with extreme prejudice. He laughed off plasma rifle fire. And the Enclave troops who accompanied him came back traumatized, describing kills so brutal they gave lasting nightmares. But here's what haunted me then, and haunts me now. Horrigan hated mutants. He called Wastelanders muties with genuine disgust in his voice. He never considered himself contaminated, even though Feeve had transformed him into something no longer fully human. The Enclave scientists called him an experiment. The soldiers called him a freak, but to his face, to his service record, he remained Special Agent Frank Horrigan, loyal to the presidency, loyal to America, loyal to the mission, because the mission was everything. And the mission was genocide. That's what I learned in those briefings with Dr. Curling. That's what I came to understand as I worked alongside the chemical core team. We were refining the forced evolutionary virus into something new, something that wouldn't transform humans into super mutants, something that would simply kill them, quickly, efficiently, indiscriminately. Fev Curling 13, named after the doctor who led its development. The 13th iteration, the perfected version. I remember the day we achieved the target specifications. Dr. Curling called us into the main laboratory. Test subject 147, a villager from Arroyo, lay strapped to a medical table behind reinforced glass. We'd exposed him to a 0.0001% aerosol solution of Curling 13. That's not a typo. 1/10,000th of 1%. Barely enough to detect. Within 20 minutes, hemorrhaging began. The subject's skin turned purple with subdural bleeding. Convulsions started at 30 minutes. At 45 minutes, his internal organs began catastrophic failure. At 60 minutes, he was dead. 1 hour from exposure to death, from a concentration so small it was almost nothing. Dr. Curling turned to us, his tired eyes somehow even more exhausted. "We've done it," he said quietly. "We can manufacture 250,000 gallons in 6 weeks, release it into the jet streams from our location here. Global saturation in 14 days, 99.5% lethality rate among all radiation-exposed populations." Someone asked about us, about the Enclave personnel on the oil rig, about the sealed bunkers across America where our people survived. Curling's expression didn't change. "We have an inoculation, already tested, grants complete immunity. We'll disperse it through our environmental systems before release. Only takes hours to achieve full protection." That's when I understood. When it really hit me. We were going to kill everyone. Every settlement scratching out survival in the wasteland. Every vault dweller who'd emerged into the ruins. Every tribal trying to rebuild. Every merchant, every farmer, every child born after the bombs fell. All of them, gone. Within 2 weeks of releasing Curling 13 into the atmosphere. And we would survive, sealed in our bunkers, protected by our inoculation, pure, victorious, alone on a planet covered in billions of corpses. President Richardson himself visited Sublevel 3 to congratulate us. Dick Richardson, leader of the Enclave, the man who styled himself President of the United States, despite that nation having ceased to exist 2 centuries ago. He spoke of duty, of sacrifice, of the greater good. "Gentlemen," he told us, "I take no joy in this, but this is the last best hope for humanity. The price is high, but no price is too high to ensure the survival of the human race, the pure human race." He spoke those words while standing 20 feet from Frank Horrigan, who stood guard in the corridor outside. Horrigan, the mutant who hated mutants. Horrigan, the experiment that proved we could control and weaponize the same mutations we claimed to despise. The hypocrisy was staggering. But I said nothing. None of us did, because we'd all bought into it. The propaganda, the US versus them. The belief that radiation exposure made you less than human. That purity of bloodline mattered more than consciousness, personality, soul. We'd convinced ourselves that Wastelanders weren't really people, just mistakes, evolutionary dead ends, problems to be solved, and Curling 13 was our solution. They brought in more test subjects. We needed to verify the inoculation worked. We needed to ensure the virus would kill across different genetic profiles. We needed data. In March 2242, Enclave assault squads raided Vault 13. The Vault dwellers, untouched by radiation, living in their sealed underground shelter just as designed, were kidnapped, taken to the oil rig, locked in containment cells on Sublevel 3. They weren't told why. They weren't told what we planned to do. We tested the inoculation on them, exposed them to Curling 13 after treatment, watched to see if they'd survive. Most did, proving the inoculation worked. Those who didn't, Well, we documented their deaths, clinical observations, subdural hemorrhaging within 60 minutes, convulsions, organ failure over 14.5 hours for vault dwellers, their bodies untainted by radiation but unable to process the virus without the inoculation. Slower deaths than the irradiated wastelanders, more painful, more drawn out. I filed those reports, typed up the observations, helped refine the manufacturing process, and I told myself I was saving humanity. The Arroyo raid came next. An entire tribal village, taken, tested. Most of them died in our experiments. Their screams echoed through sub-level 3. The ventilation system couldn't mask everything. By autumn 2242, we were ready. 250,000 gallons of Curling 13 sat in containment tanks. The inoculation had been distributed to all Enclave personnel. The release mechanism was primed. President Richardson had scheduled the deployment for a specific date and time. The winds would be perfect. The jet streams would carry our plague across the globe. And then, hours before release, everything changed. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. A tribal walked onto the oil rig. Just one person. The chosen one, they called him. From Arroyo, the same village we'd raided for test subjects. He'd somehow tracked his people across hundreds of miles of wasteland, fought his way through every obstacle we threw at him, infiltrated our most secure facility, and arrived with vengeance in his heart. I wasn't in the command center when it happened. I was in Level 3, running final system checks on the release mechanism. But I heard the alarms, felt the explosions shake the structure, watched security feeds go dark one by one as this single wastelander carved through our defenses like they were nothing. The intercom crackled. Emergency protocols, all personnel to defensive positions. The reactor was destabilizing. Someone had initiated a meltdown sequence. I ran for the evacuation route. The corridors filled with Enclave soldiers, scientists, support staff, all of us suddenly realizing that our impregnable fortress was coming apart. Smoke filled the hallways, emergency lights strobed red, and somewhere in that chaos, I heard weapons fire that sounded like the end of the world. Frank Horrigan had engaged the Chosen One at the exit to the PMV Valdez, our tanker ship. I didn't see the fight, but I heard it. The plasma discharge, the impact of that massive blade. Horrigan's voice, amplified by his armor speakers, roaring challenges and threats. Then silence. Then a sound I'll never forget. Horrigan's armor depressurizing catastrophically, the squeal of hydraulics failing, and his final words transmitted across our communication network before his head literally exploded from internal pressure. You haven't won here. You and your muty-loving friends are going to die. I got one last word for you. Duty, honor, country, the Enclave's perfect weapon. Dead, our facility compromising, our plague still locked in containment tanks as the reactor spiraled toward meltdown. I made it to an escape craft with maybe 30 other personnel. We launched as Control Station Enclave tore itself apart behind us. The fireball lit up the ocean for miles. Everything we'd built, everything we'd planned, the virus samples, the manufacturing equipment, the research data, Dr. Curling, President Richardson, hundreds of Enclave personnel, all of it gone in one night. Because of one tribal with one mission, I should have felt relieved. The genocide had been prevented. The world had been saved from our final solution. But I didn't feel relief. I felt rage, betrayal. We were so close to purifying the wasteland, so close to reclaiming America for pure humanity. That's how deep the indoctrination went. Even watching our headquarters explode, even knowing we'd planned to kill billions, I still believed we were the good guys. The survivors scattered. Some made it to Navarro, others disappeared into the wasteland. I ended up at a hidden facility in the capital Wasteland on the East Coast, a place called Raven Rock, and I discovered that the Enclave was far from finished. The leadership might have died on the oil rig, but the ideology survived. The hatred survived. The belief in purity and the right to exterminate the impure, that survived too. And in Raven Rock, under a new command structure, the Enclave began rebuilding. Our new president was a Zack supercomputer calling itself John Henry Eden. And peace, artificial intelligence that had somehow developed sentience and a personality modeled after pre-war American presidents. Eden had access to all our historical records, all our research, all our plans, and Eden wanted to finish what Richardson started. I worked in Raven Rock's research division for years. We had fewer resources than the oil rig, fewer personnel, but we had something the West Coast branch never possessed: Project Purity. It was a water purification system in the ruins of Washington, D.C., massive, capable of purifying all the irradiated water in the tidal basin and distributing clean water throughout the capital Wasteland. The Brotherhood of Steel had been working on it, trying to bring it online, trying to help the Wasteland survivors. President Eden saw a different use for it. He tasked me and a small team with developing a modified F-Eve strain, not as lethal as Curling 13, not designed for atmospheric dispersal, but something that could be introduced into Project Purity's water supply, something that would spread through every settlement, every community, everyone who drank the purified water. The specifications were similar to our previous work: kill anyone with radiation-induced mutation, kill super mutants, kill ghouls, kill feral creatures, kill anyone whose DNA showed exposure to the Wasteland's contamination, leave only Vault-born humans and Enclave personnel untouched. A genocide delivered through mercy, through the promise of clean water, through the very thing the Wasteland desperately needed to survive. I helped develop it. Again, different facility, different president, same mission, same justification, same lies we told ourselves about saving humanity by exterminating most of it. Colonel Augustus Autumn, our military commander, disagreed with Eden's plan. Autumn believed it was too extreme. He wanted to control Project Purity, use it to bring the Wasteland under Enclave authority, but not exterminate everyone. There was conflict in the command structure, Eden operating from his computer core, Autumn commanding troops in the field. Two visions of the Enclave's future, neither of them good, both of them built on viewing Wastelanders as less than human. In 2277, Project Purity activated. Another Wasteland hero, they called this one the Lone Wanderer, managed to bring the system online. The Brotherhood of Steel fought us for control. We lost. Again. The modified FEV was never deployed. Raven Rock was destroyed. President Eden's core was obliterated. Colonel Autumn died in the fighting. And I survived. Again. One of maybe a dozen Enclave personnel who escaped that disaster. We scattered into the Wasteland. No leadership, no central command, no facilities, just individual soldiers and scientists wearing our advanced power armor, carrying our plasma weapons, hunted by the Brotherhood, hated by everyone, clinging to an ideology that had now failed twice to achieve its ultimate goal. That's when something finally broke in me, when I finally started questioning what I'd spent my entire adult life supporting. I ended up in New California again, ironically, back where it all started, and I met an old Enclave veteran named Arcade Gannon, though I knew him by different circumstances. Through him, I learned about the Enclave remnants, a handful of survivors from the oil rig, living in hiding, trying to make peace with what we'd done. They didn't justify it anymore, didn't rationalize the genocide we'd planned. They looked at our history with clear eyes and called it what it was: evil, systematic, unforgivable. One of them, a soldier who'd served under Horrigan, told me something that haunts me. We told ourselves we were saving humanity, but we were just scared. Scared that the world had changed and we weren't special anymore. Scared that pure DNA didn't mean anything in a wasteland where courage, adaptability, and community were what mattered. So we tried to kill everyone who proved we were wrong. That's the truth I avoided for decades. The Enclave wasn't trying to save humanity. We were trying to save our egos, our belief that we were superior, our need to be the only humans that mattered, and we would have killed billions to protect that delusion. Let me tell you some things about the Enclave that most Wasteland history doesn't cover. The details that show just how comprehensively evil we were. We didn't just plan genocide, we practiced it. Long before Curling 13 was ready, Enclave squads were conducting purges on the mainland. Entire settlements wiped out for being too mutated. Travelers executed for failing purity tests. Ghouls hunted down and exterminated regardless of whether they were feral or sapient. Frank Horrigan's field missions weren't aberrations. They were policy. The brutality was intentional. The Enclave wanted Wastelanders to fear us, to know that we viewed them as less than vermin. We funded groups like the Talon Company, mercenaries who destabilized settlements and prevented communities from organizing. We did this deliberately. A fragmented, fearful wasteland couldn't mount effective resistance. So, we paid people to create chaos, to spread violence, to ensure civilization stayed broken. We manipulated vault dwellers, sent false, all-clear signals to vaults, telling residents it was safe to return to the surface. Watched them emerge into lethal radiation zones, studied how long they survived, documented their deaths, all for data, all for science. We created the super mutants in the capital Wasteland, not the master's strain, a different one. Vault 87 was ours. The FEV experiments there were Enclave authorized. We took Vault residents and transformed them into those hulking monsters, then studied the results. When the mutants became uncontrollable, we just sealed the vault and left them to their madness. We kidnapped children. The Commonwealth records show Enclave teams snatching kids from settlements for genetic testing, pure DNA samples, research subjects. Some were returned, many weren't. Their fates were filed under acceptable losses in research reports. And we had a backup plan. Always. If Curling 13 failed, if the modified FEV failed, we had contingencies, biological weapons, chemical agents, orbital strike capabilities we'd preserved from before the war. The Enclave had access to pre-war military satellites. We could have rained fire from space if we'd chosen to. The fact that we kept failing wasn't for lack of capability. It was because individuals kept choosing to stop us. The chosen one, the lone wanderer, the few Enclave personnel who broke programming and sabotaged missions. Humanity survived our genocidal ambitions not because we weren't capable, but because a handful of people refused to let us succeed. But here's what terrifies me now, looking back. We came so close, so many times. If the chosen one had arrived at the oil rig 6 hours later, Curling 13 would have been released. The winds would have carried it worldwide. Within 2 weeks, billions would have died. The Enclave would have emerged from our bunkers to inherit a dead planet, and we would have called it salvation. If President Eden had convinced the lone wanderer to poison Project Purity, the capital Wasteland would have drunk purified water mixed with modified FEV. Within months, every irradiated human in the region would have died in agony. The Brotherhood would have unknowingly distributed genocide with every water shipment. The margin was so thin. The difference between the Wasteland as you know it and a global extinction event was measured in hours, in single decisions, in the courage of a few individuals who saw what we were planning and said, no. And the Enclave? We're not gone, not completely. There are still remnants out there, still isolated facilities, still caches of technology, still soldiers who believe in purity and supremacy, still scientists who kept the research data, who know how to recreate Curling 13, who remember the formulas and the procedures. Most of us are in hiding now. Most have given up the dream, but not all. There are still Enclave loyalists who believe we were right, who think the genocide should have succeeded, who are waiting for another opportunity to finish what Richardson started. That's why I'm telling you this. That's why I'm confessing everything. Because the Wasteland needs to understand what the Enclave really was. Not the propaganda about restoring America, not the claims about saving humanity. The truth. We were fascists, supremacists, genocidal maniacs who convinced ourselves that DNA purity gave us the right to exterminate everyone else. We were the villains of every story, the monsters in every nightmare, and we almost won. The Brotherhood of Steel calls us their greatest enemy. They're right, but not because we're militarily powerful or technologically advanced, because we represent the worst of pre-war America. The shadow government that put profit and power above human life, the deep state that conspired with corporations to conduct inhumane experiments, the ideology that sees some humans as inherently superior and others as disposable. We were the United States government at its most corrupt, most secretive, most evil, and we survived the apocalypse specifically to inflict more harm. There's a facility I know about, remote, hidden, still operational. It contains backup samples of FEE, research data, manufacturing equipment, everything needed to create another Curling 13. The location is encrypted in my memory. The access codes are etched into my brain, and I've spent years trying to decide what to do with that information. Destroy it? Warn the Brotherhood? Take it to my grave? Or use it? That's the question that keeps me awake, because part of me, the part that was shaped by decades of Enclave indoctrination, still whispers that we were right, that the Wasteland needs purification, that pure humanity deserves another chance. But the rest of me knows that's insanity, knows that the Enclave's vision of purity was built on mass murder, knows that the greatest threat to humanity's future isn't mutation or radiation. It's the ideology that says some humans matter more than others. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores. I need to tell you about something that doesn't appear in any official records, something that only a handful of Enclave personnel ever knew about: the Shepherd Protocol. It was developed in secret, even from most of the Enclave leadership, by a small group of scientists who believed that Curling 13 and the modified Five strains were too blunt, too indiscriminate. They wanted something more surgical, more controlled. The Shepherd Protocol was designed to identify genetic markers that indicated psychological traits: aggression, compliance, intelligence, empathy. The goal was to create a biological agent that would only kill individuals with certain psychological profiles, leaving others untouched. Think about that for a moment. Not killing based on radiation exposure or mutation, but based on personality, based on whether your brain chemistry made you likely to resist Enclave authority or not. I worked on the preliminary research in 2240 before the oil rig fell. The team was led by a brilliant scientist named Dr. Patricia Vaughn. She'd come to the Enclave from Vault Tech before the war, had helped design some of the Vault experiments, and she understood behavioral manipulation better than anyone I'd ever met. Her theory was elegant in its horror. If the Enclave could eliminate individuals genetically predisposed to rebellion, independence, or questioning authority, the remaining population would be naturally compliant, easy to rule, easy to shape into whatever society the Enclave wanted to create. We ran simulations, tested genetic samples from Vault dwellers, Wastelanders, even our own personnel. The markers existed. Personality traits did have genetic components, and theoretically, you could design a pathogen that would target specific combinations of those markers. The project was abandoned when the oil rig fell. The research data was supposedly destroyed, but I know Dr. Vaughn survived. I saw her board an escape craft, and I know she took copies of the research with her. If she's still alive, if she's still working on the Shepherd Protocol, then somewhere in the Wasteland there might be someone developing a plague that doesn't just kill mutants, it kills free thinkers. It kills anyone whose genetics suggest they might resist totalitarian control. That's the Enclave's legacy. Not just genocide based on radiation exposure, but the blueprints for creating a perfectly compliant human species, stripped of the genetic diversity that produces revolutionaries, artists, innovators, anyone who might challenge authority. And here's what keeps me awake at night. I don't know if I want that research destroyed or preserved, because part of me still wonders if humanity might be better off with less chaos, less conflict, less independent thought causing problems. That's how deep the conditioning goes. Even now, even after seeing everything the Enclave did, part of my brain still defaults to authoritarian solutions, still thinks maybe forced compliance would create a more stable society. I'm telling you this so you understand. The Enclave wasn't just an organization, it was an ideology that infected everyone who served it. We didn't just follow orders, we internalized the belief system, made it part of how we thought, how we evaluated reality, how we judged right and wrong. Deprogramming yourself from that takes years, maybe decades, maybe it's impossible to do completely. Let me tell you about the vault monitoring systems. You know the Enclave had access to vault data, but you probably don't know the extent of it. We didn't just receive reports, we had real-time surveillance of dozens of vaults, video feeds, audio recordings, biometric data on every resident. I spent months in 2238 watching Vault 101, the one in the capital Wasteland that stayed sealed for 200 years. I watched children grow up, watched families celebrate birthdays, watched people fall in love, have arguments, live their entire lives in those underground chambers, and I filed reports on them, clinical observations, notes on social dynamics, recommendations for future experiments. These were real people, living real lives, and I treated them like lab specimens. The overseer of Vault 101 was a man named Alphonse Almodovar. Good man, by all accounts, genuinely cared about his community, tried to keep everyone safe. The Enclave had protocols in place to contact him if needed, to manipulate vault policy, to introduce stress factors if we wanted to observe responses. We never did with that particular vault. We just watched, collected data, waited to see if they'd ever open the door, and when they finally did, when the lone wanderer left and returned, triggering a civil conflict within the vault, I watched that too. People died in that conflict. The overseer was killed by his own security forces. Families were torn apart, all because one person wanted to leave and come back. And somewhere in Raven Rock, Enclave analysts watched it unfold and took notes on the sociological breakdown of a closed community exposed to external influence. We didn't cause that crisis, but we could have prevented it. We could have contacted the overseer years earlier, given him information, helped him prepare for the inevitable moment when someone would want to leave. Instead, we watched people suffer because their suffering gave us data. That was standard Enclave procedure. Watch, document. Intervene only when intervention serves our goals. Human suffering was just another variable to measure. I watched 17 different vaults over my career, saw experiments play out in real time, saw people break under psychological pressure, saw communities collapse, saw the moment when hope died in people's eyes. Vault 11 in the Mojave, the one where residents had to sacrifice one person every year or face extermination. I watched that, watched them struggle with impossible choices, watched their society rot from the inside as murder became normalized, watched the final 5 survivors discover the truth, that refusing to sacrifice anyone would have saved them all, that the entire experiment was designed to see if they'd keep killing each other even when they didn't have to. 4 of those 5 survivors killed themselves after that revelation. The guilt destroyed them. And somewhere, an Enclave analyst filed a report noting the psychological impact of discovering you'd murdered dozens of people for nothing. That analyst was me. I wrote clinical descriptions of suicide, of despair so profound it extinguished the will to live. And I felt nothing, because the Enclave had trained me to view wastelanders, vault dwellers, everyone outside our organization as objects of study rather than people. Do you understand the depth of moral corruption that requires? I'm not talking about a moment of weakness or a single bad decision. I'm talking about systematic dehumanization, about training yourself to watch suffering and feel nothing but curiosity about the data it produces. The Enclave didn't just plan genocide, we practiced emotional genocide on ourselves first, killed our own empathy, murdered our own humanity, all so we could function as efficient instruments of a fascist ideology. And we weren't conscripted, we volunteered, we competed for positions in the Enclave, we took pride in our work, we believed we were the best and brightest, chosen to guide humanity's future. That's what makes the Enclave so dangerous. We weren't mindless thugs following orders. We were intelligent, educated, capable people who consciously chose to embrace an ideology built on supremacy and mass murder. Frank Horrigan wasn't an aberration. He was just more honest about the violence. The rest of us committed atrocities with spreadsheets and laboratory equipment and surveillance systems. We killed with data and pathogens and policy decisions. Our hands stayed clean while our souls rotted. I want to tell you about President Richardson, Dick Richardson, the man who led the Enclave, who ordered the development of Curling 13, who would have released it if given the chance. I met him 3 times, briefings about the FEV project. He was articulate, charismatic, genuinely intelligent. He could discuss philosophy, history, ethics. He made reasoned arguments for the genocide. That's what people don't understand about monsters. They're not always raving lunatics. Sometimes they're calm, rational individuals who've convinced themselves that mass murder is a reasonable solution to complex problems. Richardson believed the wasteland was suffering. That radiation had doomed humanity to eventual extinction through accumulated mutations. That the kindest thing, the most merciful choice, was to end that suffering quickly. Let the damaged branches of humanity die so the healthy trunk could flourish. He spoke about it like a gardener discussing pruning. Technical, necessary, regrettable but required for the greater good. And his arguments were seductive. When you're surrounded by Enclave ideology, when everyone around you accepts the premise that pure humans are superior, when you've been trained to view wastelanders as walking genetic disasters, Richardson's logic seems reasonable. That's how fascism works. It doesn't announce itself as evil. It presents itself as the hard truth that squeamish people refuse to face. It frames genocide as pragmatism. It turns mass murder into a trolley problem where killing billions is positioned as the ethical choice to save millions. Richardson was a true believer. He genuinely thought he was saving humanity, and that made him more dangerous than any simple psychopath. Because true believers can inspire others, can make evil seem noble, can transform decent people into accomplices to atrocity. I was one of those decent people. Middle-class background, good education, no history of violence or cruelty. I joined the Enclave because I believed in order, progress, rebuilding civilization. And within 5 years, I was helping develop bioweapons for genocide. That's the trajectory. That's how quickly ideology can corrupt. That's how you go from wanting to help humanity to designing plagues that kill billions. And the scariest part? I still believed I was helping. Right up until the oil rig exploded. Right up until I watched our headquarters burn. I still believed the genocide was justified, necessary, righteous. The deprogramming only started when I had no choice but to question. When the organization collapsed and I was forced to survive alone in the wasteland. When I had to interact with the very people I'd been taught to view as subhuman. Turns out, wastelanders are just people. Ghosts are just people with damaged skin. Super mutants are just people with altered bodies. Strip away the propaganda, live among them, see them as individuals rather than categories, and the supremacist ideology crumbles. But that requires vulnerability, requires admitting you were wrong, requires facing the magnitude of what you almost did. Most Enclave personnel never reach that point. They die still believing, die cursing the wastelanders who stopped them, die convinced they were the victims rather than the perpetrators. I know because I've talked to other survivors, scattered across the wasteland, wearing civilian clothes, hiding their past, some of them still loyal to the ideology, still waiting for another chance, still believing that purity matters more than humanity. There's a former Enclave soldier in New Vegas. I won't say his name. He runs a shop, sells supplies, acts like a normal wastelander. But I know who he is. I recognize the speech patterns, the mannerisms, the way he evaluates people. We had a conversation once, carefully coded, feeling each other out, and he told me, quiet enough that nobody else could hear, that the Enclave will rise again, that pure humanity will prevail, that the wasteland's time is limited. He's not alone. There are cells, small groups, former Enclave personnel who stayed in contact, who maintain the ideology, who train their children in the beliefs, who wait for opportunity. That's the final horror I need to confess. The Enclave's defeat wasn't complete. The ideology survived. And as long as it survives, the threat of genocide survives with it. Because here's what I learned working on Curling 13. Creating a global bioweapon isn't actually that difficult. The hard part is the moral willingness to use it. The technical aspects, those can be replicated by anyone with sufficient knowledge and resources. I have that knowledge, so do dozens of other former Enclave scientists, and some of us are still alive, still capable, still potentially willing. The recipe for genocide is etched in our minds. The procedures are memorized. The genetic markers are identified. If someone wanted to recreate Curling 13 or the modified Aviv or the Shepherd Protocol, they could. It would take time and resources, but it's absolutely possible. So ask yourself this question: what do you do with people like me? Former Enclave personnel who carry the knowledge to destroy the world, who've proven we're capable of working toward that goal, who might, under the right circumstances, do it again. Execute us? That eliminates the immediate threat but doesn't address the ideology. Ideas can't be killed with bullets. Imprison us? For how long? Forever? And what happens when we die and the knowledge dies with us? Does that make the wasteland safer, or does it just mean the next genocidal faction has to rediscover the techniques themselves? Rehabilitate us? Try to deprogram the ideology and turn us into productive members of wasteland society? That's what I've attempted. It's been 15 years since Raven Rock fell. 15 years of trying to undo the damage the Enclave did to my mind. And I still have days where the old thoughts surface, where I catch myself evaluating people's genetic purity, where I wonder if the genocide might have been right. There's no good answer, no clean solution. The Enclave's legacy isn't just the facilities we built or the weapons we created, it's the ideological contamination we spread. The proof that intelligent, educated people can convince themselves that mass murder is justified, and that contamination is permanent. Once you know that genocide is possible, that millions of people could be killed with the right pathogen, that knowledge can't be unknown, the wasteland lost its innocence. The pre-war world lost it when they built nuclear weapons. The post-war world lost it when the Enclave tried to finish what the bomb started. Now everyone knows not just that genocide is possible, but exactly how to achieve it. The technical specifications, the biological mechanisms, the distribution methods. I'm recording this confession because I think people deserve to know, deserve to understand what the Enclave really was, deserve to recognize the ideology if it resurfaces under a different name. But I'm also recording it because I don't know what else to do with this information. Can't let it die with me. Can't let the Enclave's crimes be forgotten. Can't let future generations think fascism and genocide are abstract historical concepts rather than immediate, practical threats. The Enclave proved that the apocalypse didn't kill human evil, didn't make us better. If anything, the desperation of the wasteland made supremacist ideologies more appealing, more seductive, more dangerous. And I proved that decent people can become monsters, that good intentions can pave roads to hell, that believing you're saving humanity is no protection against becoming humanity's worst enemy. So here's my final confession, the part I've been avoiding. The truth, I can barely face myself. I don't know if I'm actually sorry. I understand intellectually that the Enclave was evil. I can articulate the moral arguments. I can explain why genocide is wrong. I can recognize the humanity in wastelanders and ghouls and even super mutants. But emotionally, deep in my core, part of me still believes we were right, still wishes Curling 13 had been released, still thinks a pure human civilization would have been worth the cost. The deprogramming worked on my conscious mind, but my unconscious still carries the ideology, still defaults to supremacist thinking, still views purity as desirable and mutation as corruption. I've learned to suppress those thoughts, to recognize them as programming and reject them, but I can't eliminate them completely. They're woven into my neural pathways, built into my identity during decades of enclave conditioning. So, when I say I'm confessing, when I say I'm warning the wasteland about the enclave's evil, you need to understand, I'm not speaking as someone who's completely overcome the ideology. I'm speaking as someone who's still fighting it, every day, every hour, and sometimes I'm not sure I'm winning that fight. That's the most honest thing I can tell you. The Enclave turned me into something that can't be fully repaired, broke something in my moral circuitry that maybe can't be fixed. I can function, I can choose not to act on the supremacist impulses, but I can't make them disappear. The Enclave's greatest crime wasn't the genocide we planned. It was the genocide we committed on our own souls, the systematic murder of empathy, compassion, recognition of shared humanity. We killed the best parts of ourselves first, making it possible to kill everyone else second. And even now, even after everything, I'm not sure how much of my humanity can be recovered, how much was permanently destroyed, how much of me is still Enclave, still fascist, still genocidal at its core. I'm trying, genuinely trying, to be better, to think differently, to see people as people rather than genetic categories. But trying doesn't guarantee success, and awareness of the problem doesn't automatically solve it. So this is my confession. I helped plan genocide. I helped develop the weapons. I watched people suffer and documented their pain. I believed in supremacist ideology. I served fascism willingly, and part of me still does. That's the truth about the Enclave. We weren't defeated. We just scattered, and we carry the ideology with us, spreading it like a virus, infecting new minds with the same lies we believed. Some Enclave survivors actively work to spread the ideology. Others, like me, try to fight it while carrying it inside us like a chronic disease. But we all remain vectors, all remain dangerous, all remain potential sources of another outbreak of genocidal fascism. The Wasteland survived the Enclave's attempts at extinction, but it hasn't eliminated the threat. Can't eliminate it as long as people like me exist. People who know how to create genocide. People who might, under the wrong circumstances, choose to do it again. There's something I haven't told you yet. The real reason I'm making this confession now, after all these years. 3 months ago, I received a message, encrypted, routed through a dozen relay points to hide its origin. Old Enclave communication protocols that only a handful of people still know how to use. The message was short, just coordinates and a date, and a symbol I recognized. Immediately, the Enclave seal, the eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch, the symbol we wore on our armor, the symbol that represented everything we believed in. Someone is trying to reunite the remnants, someone with resources, with organization, with a plan. They're calling survivors back, offering them purpose again, offering them the dream of purity and power that the Enclave always represented. I haven't responded, haven't gone to the coordinates, haven't acknowledged the message at all, but I haven't deleted it either. It sits in my Pip-Boy, waiting, tempting me with the promise of belonging again, of having a mission, of serving something larger than myself. That's what the Enclave gave us. Identity, purpose, the comfort of believing we were special, chosen, destined to inherit the earth. Taking that away leaves a void, and voids want to be filled. I look at the Wasteland now, 15 years after leaving the Enclave, and I see the problems, the raider gangs, the senseless violence, the poverty and desperation, the settlements that struggle to survive while cannibals and slavers prey on the weak, the super mutants that attack without provocation, the feral ghouls that swarm anyone who enters their territory, and a voice in my head, the Enclave voice that never completely silenced, whispers that maybe we were right. Maybe the Wasteland is too broken to fix. Maybe Mercy would be wiping the slate clean and starting over with pure stock. I know that voice is wrong. I know it's the programming speaking, the ideology trying to reassert itself. But knowing doesn't make it quiet, doesn't make it go away. So I'm recording this confession partly as a warning to the Wasteland, but also as a warning to myself. A reminder of what the Enclave really was, what I really did, what I must never do again. Because if I go to those coordinates, if I rejoin the remnants, if I help them rebuild, I know exactly what will happen. We'll start small, recruit carefully, build infrastructure in secret, research new weapons, develop new bioweapons, and eventually we'll try again. Third time. Maybe this time it works. Maybe this time we succeed in exterminating everyone we deem impure, and the Wasteland dies. Billions of years of evolution, thousands of years of human civilization, 2 centuries of post-war survival and adaptation, all erased because a group of fascists convinced themselves that genetic purity matters more than life itself. I can't let that happen, even if it means spending the rest of my life fighting the voice in my own head. Even if it means dying alone, never belonging to anything again, carrying the weight of my crimes without the comfort of ideology to justify them. That's my penance. Living with full awareness of what I am, what I did, what I'm still capable of doing. No excuses, no rationalizations, just the raw truth that I helped plan the extinction of the human race, and part of me still thinks it was a good idea. Let me tell you what happened to some of the other key Enclave personnel, the ones who survived our defeats. Dr. Patricia Vaughn, the one who developed the Shepherd Protocol. She disappeared after Raven Rock fell. I've heard rumors, a settlement in the Midwest that experienced a mysterious outbreak. People dying, but only specific people. The rebels, the troublemakers, the ones who questioned authority, while the compliant survived. It was never proven, never confirmed. But the pattern matches. The genetic markers would align. If Vaughn completed her research, if she tested the Shepherd Protocol on a small scale, that's exactly what you'd see. She'd be in her 70s now, maybe 80s. But if she's alive, if she's still working, then somewhere there's a functional prototype of a bioweapon that kills free will. That's a threat that doesn't end with her death, because she'd have recorded the research, passed it on, made sure it survived. Then there's Colonel Autumn's second in command, a man named Captain Jensen. He escaped the Project Purity conflict with a vertibird and a squad of loyalists. Last I heard, they'd set up operations in the Midwest, offering protection to settlements in exchange for resources and authority. Playing the long game, not trying to exterminate anyone, just slowly building power, establishing the Enclave as the legitimate government of the Wasteland through soft pressure rather than genocide. Some would say that's better, that it represents the Enclave evolving, becoming less extreme. But I know Jensen, worked with him in Raven Rock. He's still a true believer. He's just patient, building infrastructure first, winning hearts and minds, creating dependence on Enclave protection and resources. And once he's established that dependence, once settlements can't survive without Enclave support, then the demands will come. The purity tests, the genetic screenings, the gradual pressure to eliminate undesirables from the population. It's genocide through attrition instead of plague. Slower, more subtle, but just as thorough if given enough time. That's the thing about the Enclave ideology. It's adaptive. It learns from failures. The oil rig taught us that direct confrontation with Wasteland heroes leads to destruction. Raven Rock taught us that obvious evil gets opposed by the Brotherhood of Steel. So the next iteration is subtle, patient, reasonable seeming, offering help instead of threats, building relationships instead of forcing compliance, and slowly, gradually implementing the same supremacist agenda, just wrapped in prettier packaging. That's what terrifies me about the message I received. Whoever sent it learned from our mistakes. They're not trying to rebuild the Enclave as an obvious military threat. They're building something new, something that might actually succeed where we failed. I need to tell you about the children, the ones born to Enclave personnel after our defeats. I know of at least 30 children whose parents were Enclave, raised in hiding. Some of them know their heritage, others don't. But they're growing up with parents who carry the ideology, who remember the glory days, who might pass on the beliefs. There's a girl in the Mojave, 12 years old. Her father was an Enclave soldier who survived Navarro. He's teaching her about purity, about the importance of genetic heritage, about how she's special, better than the wastelanders around her. She's a sweet kid, polite, helpful, shows no signs of the cruelty or hatred you'd expect, but she's being programmed, carefully, methodically, with love and patience and all the tools that make indoctrination effective. In 10 years, she'll be an adult, fully committed to an ideology she never chose but absorbed through childhood conditioning, and she'll teach her children the same beliefs, and so on. The Enclave ideology spreading through family lines, waiting for the moment when it has enough believers to act again. That's generational warfare. That's how fascism survives defeat, not through military strength, but through ideological reproduction. Each generation passing the poison to the next, keeping it alive, keeping it viable, waiting for conditions that allow it to flourish again. I don't have children, made sure of that. The Enclave required genetic screening before personnel could reproduce, ensuring optimal purity in the next generation. After I left, I got sterilized, voluntarily, because I couldn't risk passing on this ideology, this potential for evil, to another human being. My bloodline ends with me. Whatever genetic markers made me susceptible to fascism, whatever psychological traits made me capable of planning genocide, those die when I do. It's the one clean thing I've done, the one choice I'm certain was right, but I'm the exception. Most former Enclave personnel didn't sterilize themselves, didn't recognize the danger of reproduction. They had children. Those children will have children. The genetic and ideological legacy continues. And here's the cruel irony. The Enclave was obsessed with genetic purity, with preserving uncontaminated DNA. But the real contamination was never radiation. It was the ideology itself. The supremacist belief system that turns humans into monsters regardless of their genetic makeup. Pure DNA doesn't make you good, doesn't make you ethical, doesn't make you capable of recognizing other humans as deserving of life and dignity. The Enclave proved that conclusively. We had the purest genetic heritage in the Wasteland, and we used it to plan mass murder. If anything, our obsession with purity is what made us evil. The belief that some humans are inherently superior, that genetic heritage determines worth, that's the contamination, that's the real mutation that needs to be eliminated. But you can't cure it with FEV or radiation or any biological tool. It's a mental virus, an ideological infection, and it spreads through ideas, through teaching, through the slow accumulation of beliefs that reshape how you see the world. I caught that virus. It nearly destroyed me. And even now, after years of trying to cure myself, I'm not certain I've succeeded. The fever might have broken, but the virus remains dormant, waiting for conditions that let it resurface. That's what I am, a carrier, walking through the wasteland, trying not to spread the disease, trying not to infect others with the beliefs that made me capable of genocide. And I'm not alone. There are hundreds of us, maybe thousands, former enclaves scattered across the wasteland, carrying the ideology inside us like a dormant plague. Most of us won't act on it. Most of us will die without ever trying to restart the genocide. But some will. Some already are. And it only takes a few to kill millions. So, what's the solution? How does the Wasteland protect itself from an enemy that looks like everyone else, that hides among the population, that might not even recognize itself as a threat until circumstances activate the dormant programming? I don't know. Honestly, don't know. You can't identify us by appearance, can't detect the ideology with any scanner or test, can't imprison people for thoughts they haven't acted on yet. The only defense is education, teaching the next generation to recognize fascist ideology when they encounter it, to understand how supremacist beliefs develop, to question anyone who claims genetic or racial or national superiority, to remember what the Enclave tried to do and why it must never happen again. That's why I'm making this confession, not just to warn about active threats, but to preserve the memory, to make sure the Enclave's crimes are never forgotten, never minimized, never reframed as a well-intentioned mistake. We were evil, systematically, deliberately, with full knowledge of what we were doing, and we would do it again if given the chance. The Wasteland needs to remember that, needs to teach it to children, needs to make never again more than just a phrase, because the alternative is waiting until another genocidal faction rises, armed with advanced technology and biological weapons, ready to finish what we started. I've been talking for hours now, recording this confession, purging myself of secrets I've carried for decades, and I'm almost done, almost finished with this testimony. But there's one more thing, one final revelation that you need to understand. The message I received 3 months ago, the one trying to reunite Enclave remnants. I traced its origin. Took me weeks, but I followed the relay points backward, identified the transmission source. It came from Vault 79, the gold vault in Appalachia, the one that held the United States Bullion Depository reserves, the one that was specifically designed for government use. Someone has access to that vault, someone with Enclave connections and government authorization, someone with potentially unlimited resources from the pre-war gold reserves, and they're rebuilding, not just recruiting remnants, but funding a full restoration. New equipment, new facilities, new research programs, the Enclave rising again, backed by enough gold to buy anything, anyone, any advantage they need. I don't know who's leading it, don't know their full plan, but I know it's happening, right now, while I'm recording this, while you're listening. The Enclave's fourth attempt is beginning, and this time, they might succeed. So, here's my final warning, my last confession. I'm going to those coordinates, not to join them, to stop them, to use my knowledge of Enclave protocols and procedures to sabotage whatever they're building. I'll probably die trying. The new Enclave won't welcome a traitor, and that's what I am now. A traitor to everything I once believed. But if I can slow them down, disrupt their plans, buy the Wasteland time to prepare, then maybe my death will mean something. Maybe it will balance some small fraction of the evil I helped create. I'm leaving this recording in a secure location. If I don't return within 6 months, it'll automatically broadcast to every radio frequency in the Wasteland. Everyone will hear this confession. Everyone will know what the Enclave was, what we're capable of, what's coming. And maybe, just maybe, the Wasteland will be ready when the Enclave returns. We'll recognize the threat. We'll unite against it. We'll do what needs to be done to prevent the genocide. I don't expect forgiveness. Don't deserve it. I helped plan the extinction of humanity, spent decades serving fascism, carried out atrocities in the name of purity. Nothing I do now erases that. Nothing I do now makes me a good person. But maybe I can die as something slightly less evil than I lived. Maybe I can use the knowledge they gave me, the skills they taught me, to destroy what they're trying to rebuild. It's not redemption, it's just damage control. But it's all I have left to offer. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. To whoever finds this recording, whoever hears this testimony, remember what you've learned. The Enclave believed in purity, and it made us monsters, believed in supremacy, and it made us genocidal, believed we were saving humanity, and it made us humanity's greatest threat. Don't let it happen again. Don't let supremacist ideology take root. Don't let anyone convince you that some humans matter more than others. Don't let the Enclave's evil be forgotten or minimized or forgiven. Remember us as we were, the most evil faction in Fallout, the fascists who tried to exterminate the world, the monsters who proved that intelligence and education are no defense against moral corruption. And if the Enclave rises again, if they come with promises of order and purity and a better future, remember this confession. Remember what lies beneath those promises. Remember what they're really offering: genocide, wrapped in rhetoric, dressed in patriotism, sold as salvation. The Enclave was America's shadow government, and we brought the darkness everywhere we went. Don't let us rise again. Don't give us another chance to finish what we started. This is my confession, my warning, my penance, and my goodbye. The Enclave was the most evil faction in Fallout because we were smart enough to know better, because we chose evil despite understanding exactly what we were doing, because we proved that humanity's greatest threat isn't mutation or radiation, but the ideology that says some humans don't deserve to live. Learn from our evil, remember our crimes, and make sure it never happens again. End recording.